Hi, and welcome back to my channel. If it's your first time here, my name is Stefan, and this channel is really dedicated pretty much entirely to helping people get better with Dimir Shadow in Modern. If you're returning, very big thank you to all of you guys that have subscribed or have kind of watched my videos or my first video. It was pretty successful, honestly, for what I was expecting. A lot of very kind words and just encouragement as a whole, which I really appreciate because the reality is, surprisingly enough, these videos do take like 10 to 12 hours to make just because I do a lot of note taking. I go through all of my different matches, games, and write pretty comprehensive notes. My brain also just doesn't work in a way that I can actively communicate as much as I want to effectively and meaningfully on the fly. So I have to take a lot of time and prep ahead of time to make sure that the content and the overall videos line up with what I'm trying to achieve. So awesome to get this type of encouragement and happy that it's been helpful to people. Looking forward to continuing to make more and hopefully at a much faster rate overall. I know it's been kind of close to 2 months, if not 2 months already since my last video. So hoping to get them out a little bit more quickly. Unfortunately, MTGO went through this situation where they kind of corrupted all of the old files of a lot of my games. So I had to kind of start building up new inventory of videos that I would be able to record and make them interesting for you guys. Anyway, so thank you guys so much if you were here before and have been supporting my efforts. If you're new here, looking forward to having you. Hopefully this is going to be helpful. Let's dive into the content. First and foremost, we've got just a quick comparison between the two lists. So last list, definitely a different meta to some degree. Some of the biggest changes realistically is, I guess, Leyline of the Guild Pack has released, and Domain has taken a pretty significant chunk of the meta, with Yawgmoth also kind of jumping up earlier a couple months ago as kind of the top deck since the bans. People have been playing a lot more Cascade decks, more specifically Rhinos, as it is a pretty good counter matchup to be able to beat and take down Yawgmoth and some of the other decks out there like Scam. So it's almost gotten to the point where it's a little bit oppressive in terms of how many Cascade decks are out there from what I've been seeing recently. But yeah, these are the kind of changes that I've made with some of the adjustments to the meta overall. Just to go down it quickly, I'm bringing in two Archmage's Charms. Realistically, I was kind of getting to a point where the deck was feeling like it just needed a little bit of card advantage to kind of just get over the hump of some of the more mid-range focused games that can come up. It's also very versatile. I know a lot of people that I've been speaking to in some of the discords have been skeptical of Archmage's Charm. It is a little bit clunky. It's a 3 mana spell. But as you'll see, as I play through some of these leagues, I've very much enjoyed it. I like its versatility. I think it brings a lot of value to the deck. If you're struggling with it, or maybe I just haven't played enough games with it to really get a full scope of when it's bad. But for me, at least, I like the advantage it brings of deeper card selection or card advantage, as well as being able to be versatile as something that can steal an amulet or a one-drop creature, or just be a counter spell when needed. So pretty interesting. I've enjoyed the addition. I also have brought back in Brazen Borrower, which was something that I had early on back when I was doing well with the deck in October. Really like Brazen Borrower as a way to bounce whatever is relevant on your opponent's side of the field, and then also late game get a 3/1 flyer as a threat when needed. It should always be seen kind of as a 2 mana spell before it is a 3 mana spell. Brazen Borrower as a creature is good, but it's certainly not something that I'm trying to cast proactively. I'm usually keeping them in my hand to try and disrupt what my opponent is doing, and then playing at the borrower when it makes sense. I've brought it back up to 2 dismembers, which is what I've been on for quite a while. There are no street rates in the list, same as last time. But in this case, I do want to be able to lower my life total a little bit more quickly. So 2 dismembers in kind of place of the Bitter Triumph that I had in the last list. What else? I've also been playing a one of Dark Slick Shores. This has been a pretty interesting upgrade. I've really liked it. It's entirely opened up all of my turn 1 plays, giving me full access to black and blue, while also balancing out my meta or my mana long term, right? So I've been very happy with it. It comes down untapped for the first 3 land drops that I'm going to make. And realistically, the deck really functions on 3 lands most of the time. If you get to a 4th land and it is a tap land, more often than not, it's not the end of the world, as the deck's just so good at functioning on 3 mana. So I'll take the advantage of an untapped blue-black land. Sure, it doesn't lower my life, but having that additional blue-black land on top of the Watery Graves to help balance out that combination of blue and black spells and give me consistency on turn one has been extremely helpful. And especially if you're playing Dothy Voidwalker in the sideboard or even in the main board, I would highly recommend taking a look at Darkslake Shores as a one of in the list somewhere. I guess other noticeable changes: Tishana's Sidebinders have been moved to the sideboard. Still a good card, but I think it's a little bit more situational based off the matchup. So wanted to take it out of the main. I already have a decent amount of 3-drops in there. I don't want to overcrowd that 3-drop space, and really just want to be able to bring it in selectively when I can start to manage how I build my mana curve in sideboard games. Other than that, I have come down, trimmed one dress down out of the 75. There's still one in the sideboard. There's now just one in the main. And I've switched to Nihil Spellbomb as kind of my graveyard hate and bringing in some Flusterstorms into the main, or excuse me, into the sideboard, which has been very helpful at helping to improve overall the Cascade matchups, as well as being helpful in some of the more instant sorcery focused matchups like Murktide and a couple others out there. So it's a versatile enough counterspell that does very well, while also amplifying the amount of hate that I can have in combination with Chalice of the Void and Engineered Explosive, really for Rhinos, and then drop the Engineered Explosives for living in matchup. But as it stands, I feel like this 75 is pretty comfortable for me. I like it a lot. It's kind of feeling like home. So probably what I'm going to continue to run with for the indefinite future, as I've been having a lot of success with it. All right. Anyway, those are the changes. We will drop this this first deck here and move into the games. Okay, just had to take a quick pause, adjust the pop out as I realized there were 2 cards, Hibernation and Tishana's Tidebinders, which I'm running 2 of each that were not visible in the original intro. So as you'll see, those are in the deck. Tishana's Sidebinder, great card, but I just want it to be in the sideboard as I want to be a little bit more selective as how I play it. And then Hibernation coming in as a great way to deal with the uptick in domain lists with that new Guild Pack, Leyline of the Guild Pack card. When you get that and Scion of Draco going together, it can just be extremely problematic for a deck that basically has a bunch of targeted removal. A lot of blue decks in the format have been picking it up somewhere in their sideboard as just a good way to deal with this combination of Leyline of the Guild Pack and Scion of Draco and kind of swing some pretty significant advantage in your favor for the matchup. But anyway, let's dive into the actual gameplay here, see how things go. Lucky to be on the play. Opening hand is definitely good. Able to Thoughtseize on turn 1 and kind of either sculpt with Preordain or hold up Orcish Bowmaster, depending on what my opponent's doing on turn 2. And then from there, if I want to play out a 5/5 Murktide region, technically I should have the opportunity to do so if it makes sense. We'll see how it plays out. So I'm going to lead on a fetch land, Thoughtseize, and take a look at my opponent's hand. We're going to see that we're up against 4-color money pile. They've got, I don't know, kind of average hand, definitely some problematic cards. Ren and 6 being, in my opinion, the most problematic initially. They don't have any fetch lands, but they're almost certainly going to draw one at some point in the next couple of turns, and Ren and 6 is going to guarantee just land drops indefinitely. Both the One Ring and Omnath are more or less mid-range, kind of a couple more turns from now before they even come down. So Preordain should hopefully allow me to dig to some way to either Thoughtseize one of them out of their hand or be able to consistently counter whatever they're trying to do. Prismatic Ending, not the end of the world. I mean, if it takes out my Orcish Bowmaster, so be it. I still have a token. Obviously, it's good against a Death Shadow, but Death Shadow is a pretty mediocre threat in this matchup as it is. So very happy to have the Murktide region in hand here and hopefully going to be able to ride it to victory. Going to, take this Ren and 6, pass it over to my opponent. They're going to put in a tapped Sacred Foundry, pass it back to me. I'm going to put out a Polluted Delta. This allows me to again, kind of grow my graveyard when I crack it. And I'm going to hold up the Orcish Bowmaster for their end step. They do find a Windswept Teeth, which does kind of validate my decision to take the Ren and 6. Obviously, they did find that fetch that I was concerned about. And I'm going to play out an Orcish Bowmaster in their end step to start applying some pressure and kind of forcing them to have to use that Prismatic Ending against it unless they want their One Ring to really start to cause them some problems if they're able to resolve it. I'm able to draw a Archmage's Charm for turn, definitely a good draw. I'm going to play out my second island that I have in hand here. and realistically be able to hold up the Archmage's Charm for problematic cards like Teferi if they were able to draw one, depending on kind of how they play things out. I might also just draw two. Part of the reason I love having Archmage's Charm in the deck is just the versatility and the ability to take some card advantage if my opponent's not doing anything. So I'm going to swing in for two here, pass it back to my opponent. They are just going to fetch a Triome to go to their turn. In this case, they decide to Prismatic Ending Orcish Bowmaster. I'm not really concerned with this. It's kind of done its job. I've got a 1/1 token still. They play out that Boseiju that I know about. And then they decide to go with a Delighted Halfling, which I did not realize they were going to play or did not anticipate them playing. Very happy to have Archmage's Charm here. I could have countered the Delighted Halfling, but it is a 1-mana card. I can just steal it and start to apply continued pressure, and technically it does give me access to more mana. I don't really have any legendary spells in the deck, so it won't be colored mana, which is a bit problematic. Realistically, it will be used more as just an additional threat that can continue to apply pressure on my opponent. So I am going to steal this Delighted Halfling here and go back to me. So yeah, draw on the lock for turn. And as we progress forward here, I am going to preordain first to try and find something. We do see a Death Shadow and a Fatal Push. I'm going to bottom both and find another Drown in the Lock. Not super great, considering that we know they've got a couple of 4-mana spells that they're going to be using. They also have a Plains in their hand, so in reality, they can play a Plains and get underneath my Drown in the Lock with either the Omnath or the One Ring. So definitely in a bit of a pinch here. And like I said, unfortunately, the Delighted Halfling does not allow me to tap for blue mana and cast both a Murktide Regent and hold up Drown in the Lock. So I do just have to kind of play out the Murktide here and hope that we're able to apply some pressure without anything too crazy happening on my opponent's end. But yeah, things kind of take a weird turn here. As you'll see, my opponent is going to play out a Teferi, which certainly wasn't expecting. Definitely a problematic card. And the Teferi is going to bounce my Murktide. And luckily, I've got kind of two creatures here to be able to deal with the Teferi. They are going to play out another Delighted Halfling, which again, very problematic card, but I'm just going to Drown in the Lock that Halfling, swing one at the Teferi and one at them. Technically, there is a risk that they have a Solitude in their hand, and they're able to pitch the Omnath to the Solitude to protect the Teferi with the one creature that I swing at it. So it could make more sense to swing both at Teferi to ensure that happens. I don't know. I kind of felt like the chances they actually had it were slim and played a little bit more aggressively. In reality, looking back on it, I do think there's probably no reason to play that aggressively, and it just makes more sense to swing both at Teferi to ensure that the damage goes through and Teferi gets off the board, given how problematic it is. Yeah, so going to drown, going to swing at Teferi and them, as I said, and then hold up drown for whatever 4-drop they go for this turn. Again, this time going to, oh no, sorry, I'm able to drown their One Ring. At this point, we are out of counter magic, and they are going to play a tapped Breeding Pool. I'm going to preordain, hoping to, again, kind of find answers to what they have going on. Do find another preordain, do find a Stubborn Denial. I'm going to top one, bottom the other. So Stubborn Denial, I thought about it for a while, realized that they have an Omnath in hand. Of course, they have some other problematic cards like Teferi, like the One Ring, Leyline Binding, that are all good for my Stubborn Denial to be able to answer. But given that I know, Omnath is in hand, I'd much rather try and find something that's going to be a little bit more meaningful. Drown in the Lock and Fatal Push, definitely two cards that I'm happy to see here. So going to top both, definitely keeping the Drown in the Lock first so that we can answer the Omnath that they're likely to be playing out. I am going to shock in just to be able to lower my life total a little bit so that future Death Shadows from here are at least able to enter the battlefield. Again, swinging with both because the Delayed Halfling cannot tap for colored mana so that I can cast both spells here, unfortunately. And even if I wanted to, there's not enough cards in my graveyard to cast a Murktide and hold up Drown. So being able to hold up Drown the Lock, they actually go for a Nissa here. And this is where this game starts to take a bit of a weird turn. I was really anticipating an Omnath. looking back at it, and as you'll see this game play out, I really should have drowned this Nissa on the stack. Uh, it's going to become a bit of a problematic card. They play the Nissa, they play a fetch land. I mean, it's the only thing that really makes sense for them to do under these circumstances is to play the Nissa. If they have a fetch in hand, their last card that they have in hand is now a known Omnath. So they're going to fetch, being able to uh, both add a mana to their hand or to their mana pool and find an elemental creature in their deck. In this case, it ends up being a Solitude, which is problematic. And instead of casting the Omnath, they cast the Solitude, which I now have to drown. So I've started to fall pretty far behind here. Really, definitely 100% should not have let that Nissa resolve. I am going to attack in now that I've drawn that Fatal Push that I know about, and basically get it so that I can remove this Nissa from the board and essentially leave them with an Omnath and cast my Murktide as an 8/8, hoping that they just don't really find anything meaningful. Unfortunately, as we'll see, my opponent just rips another Solitude off the top. Goodbye, Murktide Regent. I'm back up to 20 life. That's problematic. Sorry, I let things get away from me here. So they Solitude. I'm back up to 20. I find to consider. I've been a Misty Rainforest, hoping to find something better. Obviously, hit a Death Shadow. Death Shadow 20 life is not where you want to be. But at the same time, they do have a good amount of pressure coming at me now. So hopefully this Death Shadow will be able to come out soon and start to be at least a relevant threat. But as I said earlier, Death Shadow in this matchup, typically not a super great threat to have. They cast their Omnath that we knew about, and they're going to start just doing Omnath things, swinging in with, or excuse me, only swinging in with the Solitude here, as the Omnath does have Summoning Sickness. More than happy to take that damage, as I want to just be able to hopefully get a Death Shadow down. Drawing a Thoughtseize, trying to Thoughtseize something relevant from their hand. Unfortunately, they just have a backup Omnath in hand. I mean, definitely not a terrible take, but certainly not the best take in the world. Pass it back to them. They are going to swing in with both creatures. Yeah, drop a land, swing in with both creatures, gain their 4 life, and start to continue to apply some pressure. At this point, I'm pretty happy to at least have a Death Shadow in hand here, especially now that they're tapped, or excuse me, top decking, no cards in hand. Still not in a great spot, especially that they've got a fetch land. Another fetch land represents basically 4 life loss because of the Omnath as it is. So definitely need to be careful of that. Drawing a counterspell here does allow me to play out my Death Shadow and hold up some interaction. I'm going to swing in for 1 here just because I have no problem getting the opportunity to at least chip in some damage while I can. I'm certainly not going to be blocking with my Orc army the next turn, so I'd much rather get the 1 damage in when they've got all of this life gain available to them, and just hold my Death Shadow to be able to block if they try to get super aggressive, which I don't anticipate. But yeah, that's what we're doing there. Counterspell for whatever they draw here. It ends up being a red and 6 again because they've got an Omnath on board. It is definitely going to be getting counterspelled. I cannot have them hitting land drops consistently. Otherwise, I'm just going to die to this Omnath red and 6 combo. They also have a Boseiju in the graveyard, or no, they don't have Boseiju in the graveyard. Sorry. Nonetheless, just a very problematic card. They're going to pass it back to me, and I'm going to hope to rip something decent off the top here. I hit another Death Shadow, so that's pretty fantastic. In this case, I am going to swing in with both creatures, assuming that they will basically see the 1 card in hand and this attack as a Fatal Push in hand. So they're unlikely to block, meaning otherwise they're probably going to be losing their Omnath. And it really is no risk to me because I'm going to be playing out a Death Shadow as a backup blocker. So I'm getting 6 points of damage in, almost guaranteed. If they want to block the token, so be it. It's really not the end of the world here. I think I'd rather play aggressively and just try and make sure that I'm reducing my life or their life total as much as possible. And if they draw another Solitude, there's nothing I can do about it. It's just what it is. I'm pretty far behind now. Need to get this Shadow out and just continue to try and play as aggressively as possible. Pass it back to them. They are going to get in with an Omnath and a Solitude. In hindsight, I should have realized that this is basically just them with another Omnath in hand. Doesn't really make a lot of sense to make this attack without just having something as a backup here. Either way, it makes perfect sense to block the Omnath. Otherwise, I'm down to 1 life, and they still end up having 2 creatures with the second Omnath that they're about to cast here. So I go to 5. I've got 2 8/8s and a token. So still pretty happy. They're going to draw here. They hit a land. They gain 4 life. Pretty annoying, back up to 23, but this is why we've just been chipping in little by little. Orcish Bowmaster has been a great pickup here. Going to get 1 Dash Shadow win, just kind of trying to pressure and lower my opponent's life total as much as I possibly can without misplaying. Technically, there could be an argument to swing in with both here, given that I have an Orcish Bowmaster as like a backup blocker, but I don't want to get too carried away and have to lose my Orcish Bowmaster, as they do have a potential card draw available to them that I'd much rather have a Bowmaster in play to try and help negate as much as possible. They are going to Leyline Binding, can't do anything about that. The Death Shadow that is a blocker goes away. They are going to swing in with both creatures, and I am going to cast this Orcish Bowmaster, pinging them and then blocking the Solitude with the Orc Army. So, Solitude and the Omnath with the Orcish Bowmaster. Again, the representation of a fetch land, meaning losing 4 life. I cannot go below 5 life, otherwise I'm just dead to basically anything they draw. So very good to have that Orcish Bowmaster here. Extremely good draw, and still behind, but well, maybe not as behind as I thought. Draw another Death Shadow, 3 Death Shadows in the top half, less than half of my deck. Pretty lucky. Still obviously very susceptible to a Solitude, but now I'm really starting to feel pretty good. I'm able to swing in, play out my other Death Shadow, take it from here. They they mess up big time. Not really sure what they were thinking here, if they just did bad math, but they do draw that fetch land, which would have killed me had I not blocked the Omnath, and basically go for the 4 life loss. They gain their 4 life. They're still just at 11. My Death Shadows go to 12/12s, and they're dead, even with the blockers. So all of that was still able to manage to get the win, even after kind of half punting with the Nisa being allowed to hit the board under the circumstances. So happy with that. We'll see how the rest of the game goes. Definitely got lucky to draw multiple, actually 3 Death Shadows, and not really have them find something that was going to be super relevant, like a Solitude, to get rid of them. So we'll take it. Back for game 2. So quick look at sideboarding here. I am cutting a Counterspell, a Preordain, a Fatal Push, and a Consider. I'm bringing in Tishana's Tidebinder, a Dress Down, and 2 Stern Scoldings. Basically just trying to trim on the 4 cards that I've got here, as Counterspell can be kind of dead if they've got a Halfling in play or a Teferi in play. Fatal Push, still a good relevant card against Omnaths and stuff, but at the end of the day, it's not so good that I really want to have 4 of them. Card selection, also still good to have, but I feel like having as much as I do in the main board, you can definitely trim it more often than not for better cards for the matchup. So that's the decision for why I cut. Bringing in a Tidebinder, as it's very versatile to be able to answer several things that they have, such as a ring, Leyline Binding trigger, Omnath, Solitudes, Nissa triggers, shutting all of those creatures off and the ring off until they are able to remove it if they are. So very happy with that one to come in as a one of, but don't want to clutter up the board with, or the deck with too many of them on the draw. And then Dress Down helps to protect shadows against Solitudes. Stern Scolding, exceptional card against Solitude. It can also technically hit their halflings, but more often than not, it should always be used whenever possible against Solitudes. 1 mana answer to protect your Death Shadows. Just a phenomenal card. Should be in every time that you see Solitudes against your opponent. So, all right, let's jump into game 2 here. Opening hand, kind of a borderline mulligan. I've got 3 3-mana spells in my hand. However, as I said earlier, Brazen Borrower in my mind is always a 2-mana spell first. So still kind of clunky, but I do have the ability to dig for counterplay to whatever my opponent leads on. Hopefully not a halfling, and we'll kind of just see how it goes from here. But as we'll see, unfortunately, I speak too soon because definitely going to lead on a halfling. It's a strong card. Lucky for me, I'm good enough to just rip a Fatal Push off the top and going to push that halfling, send it back to my opponent. They Blooded Strand and pass. I'm going to draw Murktide, maybe a bit early, but it's rarely going to be something I complain about when I've got a Murktide in my hand. Island and pass it back to my opponent. They play out a Forest, and they're going to pass it back to me. End step, I'm going to consider and ideally try and find a third land. I do find a stub. I consider putting this into my graveyard. It's going to just kind of increase my ability to get a Murktide. And it's kind of just one of those borderline cards. I mean, it's obviously very good against quite a bit of what they're doing, but if I don't have a creature in play, I can just rot in my hand. And I really need a third land. At the end of the day, I do decide it's worth bringing it in. If they just try and jam a One Ring next turn, I can counter it. But yeah, kind of a hit and miss decision here. We'll see how it plays out. Go back to my turn. I draw another Stubborn Denial. My other Stubborn Denial is super not good, but it definitely could be worse, but also not anywhere close to what I was hoping for under the circumstances. Pass it back to my opponent. They're going to fetch, and they're also going to miss a land drop this turn. So not so far behind. I'm kind of having to think that their hand must be full of prismatic endings, leylines or leyline bindings, ring, solitudes, omnaths, right? A bunch of like 4+ CMC stuff or stuff that's meant to interact with my board. So probably going to be a bit of a grind to get through. But the fact that they're missing lands is kind of nice for me, if all things considered. Back to me, going to draw Drown the Lock. I've got to go to clean up at this point if they're not going to do anything. And I do end up discarding one of those stubs. It's just not likely going to end up being that good. Really, any point moving forward, I've already got one in hand. Just is what it is. Now that I got a Drown, I can at least kind of deal with a Teferi or something like that. With that, okay. Yeah, it's problematic, but my opponent continues to miss land drops, and now they have a full grip. So 7 to 7 cards each, and missing land drops. Pretty mediocre here. I finally hit my third land drop. It's a fetch land. Things starting to look a little bit better for me, and send it back to my opponent. I'm going to fetch here. Not really sure why I did this. I guess I was trying to play around like a random Tishana's Tidebinder that they might be on, even though they don't have blue mana available to them. I think I just assumed that this could tap for blue, and maybe by some rare chance they have a Tishana's Tidebinder. So I'm assuming that's what I was playing around there. Definitely not needed. Didn't make sense, but that's what it is. They're going to miss another land drop, and they're going to bolt me in their first main, suggesting basically that they've missed another land drop and they don't want to discard anything. I'm going to charm in their end step to be able to draw 2 cards. Obviously, a bit risky here, as I'm rocking a full grip as it is. Could end up forcing myself to go to discard. I end up drawing a Death Shadow, a Dress Down. Both great cards, but now I don't have a land to play. Luckily, I do draw land for turn. I'm going to shock that in. I am going to throw out a Murktide here. I do have 5 cards in the graveyard, so happy to throw a Murktide out there and be able to hold up some interaction, Drown the Lock, or Stubborn Denial, depending on how my opponent wants to play things. So just want to make sure that I'm not discarding stuff, basically kind of seeing how it plays out from here and trying to start to be aggressive. But my opponent's got a full grip. I have to assume they're going to be able to interact in a meaningful way. They do go for a Leyline Binding here. I'm going to Stubborn Denial and hold up Stern Scolding for maybe they have a Solitude or something like that. Can't imagine my Tide's going to survive, but we'll see. They hit another Leyline Binding. This time, no way to respond to it. So goodbye, Murktide Regent. They are still missing land drops. It's coming back to me. I'm going to draw a Death Shadow. Certainly don't want to be playing them out in multiples. Run out the first Death Shadow and hold up both Drown the Lock and Stern Scolding. Pass it back to my opponent. It looks like they've missed another land drop. They're going to Prismatic Ending this Death Shadow. In this case, I do want to try and protect it with a Drown the Lock. Then they are going to now bolt the Death Shadow. I have no way of protecting it at this point. I lose a Death Shadow. It's not the end of the world. At least I'm not gaining life and not being able to cast my other Death Shadow here. They ship it back to me. They did hit a land drop. It's a Triome, so it comes in tapped. I'm going to fetch and shock so that I can basically have full access to my full mana without having to respond to, let's say, another bolt or anything that my opponent's doing. So I just want to fetch and shock here to, of course, both lower my life, but also give me full access to my mana without having to respond to my opponent or giving my opponent an opportunity to kind of lead and take a bit of initiative while I fetch. Pass it back to my opponent. They hit another land drop, and they're going to Prismatic Ending this shadow. Again, nothing I can do about that. Just have to let it go. I am going to cast a Brazen Borrower here. Just feel like it's time to start applying some pressure. Bouncing a Leyline Binding makes no sense. They can just recast it. So I'm going to start to apply some pressure with the Brazen Borrower. I draw an island and get in with the Borrower for 3. I've got Shana's Tidebinder if I need it. I've got Dress Down. I've got Stern Scolding. Feeling okay about everything here. They're going to just kind of ship it back to me at this point. I'm not going to do anything. Just get in for another 3. They go to Leyline Binding the Borrower. I am going to Tishana's Tidebinder that trigger and try and just continue to apply pressure. They only have 2 cards in hand at this point. I still have a Dress Down. I still have a Stern Scolding. I've got to consider if I need to find like a counter spell or try to find a counter spell. Yeah, just really wanting to apply as much pressure as possible. They tap out for Solitude. I'm going to use Stern Scolding that with Dress Down still up if they decide to or find another Solitude. So getting in for 3, they are still on a 2-turn clock at this point, but generally feeling pretty good. They do find another Solitude. I'm going to Dress Down, making sure that it doesn't take out any of my creatures. And draw a card, which is a Polluted Delta. I find a Preordain here with a Fatal Push and a can't remember what the other card was. Unfortunately, I went a little bit too fast. But find a Death Shadow, which is a great card to find. Going to consider now to try and find some additional interaction, just ways to close out this game without losing. Finding a Bowmaster, pretty happy to have that. And I'm going to just swing in the air for 3, putting my opponent down to 4. They are going to, or excuse me, I'm going to play out my Death Shadow and ship it back. They find a 1-ring here. I'm going to cast my Orcish Bowmaster before it resolves so I can get my ping them down to 3. Obviously, they're going to have protection by the time they draw a card, so I can't ping them any further. There is an argument to pinging the Solitude, so that way should they draw in their turn, I can take down that Solitude, and it kind of almost forces them more or less to draw their card in my turn. But I decide that it makes more sense to ping down to 3, as I do have a Brazen Borrower that can just swing over, and they're going to have to swing into me to gain some life anyway. Otherwise, they're just kind of dead unless they can find a relevant answer. And I do have a pretty good board state as it is. So, of course, they're going to get their protection. They're going to be able to draw their card. I'm just going to ping their Solitude here in case they draw another card, but they don't. They end up being able to cast a Chalice of the Void at this point. That's not super concerning for me, unless I just exclusively rip 1-drops off the top. Pretty happy with where things are at so far. I draw another fetch land at this point. All my fetchable lands are on the battlefield, so it's really just a way to lower my life 1 point to grow my shadow, which isn't super relevant in this spot. So just going to pass back to my opponent and hope that they're unable to do anything super great here, all things considered. Okay, geez, things are getting out of control. So what is going on? Yeah. Sorry, guys. I accidentally clicked the skip ahead button here, and it's just going to go right to the end of their turn. But what are you going to do? That's MTGO, I guess. So basically what happened there is they draw for turn. They're down to 2 life with losing 1 life from the 1-ring. If they draw from the 1-ring immediately, they're basically just dead. So they have to swing in with a Solitude before drawing. I'm going to block the Solitude with the Orc Army token, because when they do draw, I'm just going to be able to generate another one. So they do draw 2 cards. I still have my Bowmaster in play. It's going to trigger. They do have an Issa, they do have an Omnath, they draw a bunch of cards. I'm able to basically get them down to 2 life, and they have 2 mana open with 3 cards in hand, and they just can't get there. There's no way for them to interact with the board state that I have, and I get the win. So yeah, pretty happy with how that all played out, obviously. Typically a pretty tough match, especially once they start getting a bunch of card advantage going. And yeah, just overall happy with the grind. Both games going 13 plus turns with a lot of complex decision making to some degree, and being able to kind of get there after again semi punting with that Nissa in game one, with a bit of luck and a bit of good fortune, but also just some tight play. So we're back for match number two. Opening hand here, very strong on the play against pretty much any deck in the format. It has the potential for a 4/4 shadow on turn two, with some disruption depending on what my opponent's on and how they play. So very happy to keep this one, happy to see it. Let's see how it plays out. Definitely going to be leading on a Thoughtseize turn one, seeing what my opponent's on and being able to figure out how to approach the play from here. So Thoughtseize is going to show what I assume initially, at quick glance, was you are Murktide, but then I see that there's an Underworld Breach here. So some kind of breach combo-y type of deck, I would imagine. Opponent has one land, a Ragavan, Preordain, 2 bolts, and an Unholy Heat. So a lot of burn there. They're also able to get that Unholy Heat to Delirious on turn two. So going to be able to have to play a very fine game of managing my life total or my Death Shadow while also not dying to either multiple bolts or having my Death Shadow die to a Delirious Unholy Heat. Definitely going to have to play this one cleanly and make sure that I'm managing my life total as best as possible to win this one. Also, I lead on a Watery Grave simply because my hand has a lot of life loss in it. And if by some chance we're up against Burn or some other hyper aggressive deck, I do not want to put myself in a position where I just played too aggressively initially. And given my hand, I can still manage my life total effectively. I can just fetch and shock next turn if I'm not against an aggressive matchup. So leading on a Watery Grave basically just to kind of protect my life total a little bit should I be up against a hyper aggro matchup. And kind of honestly happy that I did here because they've got 2 bolts in hand. They've got a Ragavan. They've just got the ability to quickly take my life total down to a point where I'm just going to lose the game. Anyway, I've got an Orcish Bowmaster. I've got Dismember. I've got ways to deal with this Ragavan, presuming they're going to lead on it, given that they need mana. So I want to take away this Preordain, hoping that I can just kind of out-tempo them. They stop hitting land drops, and they're just stuck on one land. So that's what we do, and see how it plays out. My opponent is going to put out that Scalding Tarn that I knew about and lead on a Ragavan. I'm going to draw a Polluted Delta, in this case, shocking myself now, as I do want to be a bit more aggressive to get my life total to a place where I can start to have meaningful gameplay and balance, again, that kind of 6, 7, 8 life total to be able to enable my Death Shadow, while also being aware of the fact that they're going to have a Delirious Unholy Heat, 2 bolts. So ping down this Ragavan, ship it back to them. They bolt my Orcish Bowmaster, and they do find a second land. So again, they are currently Delirious, 4 different card types in the graveyard as anticipated, and now they do have access to that Unholy Heat. I'm going to draw a Preordain, going to fetch and shock to get my life total down to 10, giving me a 3/3 shadow, but shadow's not coming out, at least not anytime soon, until I can find meaningful interaction or counter spells to be able to both protect my shadow and my life total, so that I just don't lose to negligence and poor play. Preordain is going to find a Dress Down and a Fatal Push. Both of these I do like. The Fatal Push can answer, a Dashed Ragavan or any other creatures like DRC or something like that. Not entirely sure if they're playing DRCs, given that they do have a Underworld Breach, but more often than not, they do combo together. So I would assume that they have to have one. And then Dress Down is just a great way to protect my Death Shadow in the future, depending on how my hand can play out. It can also just be a way to clock them without having to lower my life total to a point where bolts can kill me. Just going to chip in for some damage, send it back to my opponent. They're going to, of course, fetch. And I guess kind of surprised by this, but not really, because they do have the Underworld Breach in hand. And I'm assuming that they're trying to just continuously hit land drops. So they do bin a Lightning Bolt after surveying it off this land here. And at this point, if I just remove this, their hand that I know of is basically Unholy Heat, Lightning Bolt, Underworld Breach, 1 unknown card. So I'm assuming they're trying to hit a third land here. Obviously, Underworld Breach gets a lot better as soon as they hit like 4 mana. They're able to just Underworld Breach, Bolt. So I've got to be very cautious of that. I've got to be cautious of a lot of stuff. Anyway, shipping it back to them, they are going to find another land. So probably right in assuming that that's what they're just looking to do with that survey there. Ship it back to me. I draw the dress down, which I kept on top. I'm going to play out, I'm going to first swing and then play out my Death Shadow. And this is where things start to get interesting. Basically, I'm acknowledging that I need to put pressure on my opponent. I do have a dress down. I have a way to win this game. They're at 14 life. So technically a 13/13 shadow and an Orc Army token will win the game. Now they do have Delirious Unholy Heat. So that's problematic. Technically, I can dismember my Orc Army to protect my Death Shadow, but it will only grow my Death Shadow to a 4/4, or excuse me, grow it by 4 to a 9/9, and the Unholy Heat plus the Lightning Bolt will still kill my Death Shadow. So basically, I'm hoping that my opponent will not cast a spell in my main phase, and I'm able to dress down in my end step, which will make sure that damage doesn't leave my Death Shadow, or excuse me, it leaves my Death Shadow as I move into their turn, and just turns off any creature they may try and play, whatever they end up doing, right? So really hoping my opponent doesn't do anything in my main phase. Otherwise, my Death Shadow is almost certainly dead. But again, I don't have counterspell. I don't have a way to interact with their hand realistically in any meaningful way. I'm kind of just at their mercy here. They have an Underworld Breach. They have a Heat, a Bolt, multiple bolts in the bin. Like, I'm feeling pretty dead if I don't start playing aggressively. So as we can see, luckily for me, they do not cast anything in my main phase, and they decide to end step this Unholy Heat. I am going to dress down, as I said, because dismembering my own token will just lose my token and leave my shadow susceptible to the lightning bolt. And they're just going to have an Underworld Breach for either next turn or the turn after to basically end this game. So dress down is going to put this up to a 13/13. They don't have any type of counter magic, which is great. Unlikely to have, given I know their hand more or less. 6 damage onto my Death Shadow, pass it back to me, or pass it back to them, and I now have a 13/13 Shadow. They do fetch a breeding pool here, so some type of Temur combo breach deck. Not seen anything like this really before. I don't know, maybe there are people out there playing it. I do have Dismember, I do have Fatal Push, so not really looking to use a Dismember, seeing as I'm at 8 life, dropping myself down to 4 life puts me dead to Bolt Bolt. They have an Underworld Breach, so Underworld Breach, Bolt Bolt is definitely something that can happen if they find a land. Realistically, I just have Fatal Push available to me right now. They are going to find that land. They're going to shock it in, dropping themselves down to 11. They're going to Underworld Breach, and they are going to preordain. They've got definitely options in front of them, right? They've got a Ragavan in there. They've got multiple lightning bolts. They have an Unholy Heat that, if I'm not mistaken, they can keep Delirious, but at least for one of them. So it's not super valuable. They can't kill this Death Shadow, at least while it remains a 13/13 with the dress down on the battlefield. However, it will leave the battlefield in their end step, and they will have an opportunity while Underworld Breach is still on the battlefield to be able to deal with my Death Shadow. So they do basically preordain here, trying to find something meaningful, and then they're going to Unholy Heat the Death Shadow after doing this preordain. I mean, I don't know. I don't play decks like this a lot, so I'm not really sure. Obviously, the Unholy Heat is just going to be a 2/2 or a 2 damage spell because they have to exile the card types from their graveyard to cast it. So it's only going to be doing 2 damage to my Death Shadow. Had they just kept the Unholy Heat with the 4 card types, they would have been able to cast the Unholy Heat as Delirious end step with a 5/5 Shadow on board. However, I would have had a Dismember that I could have then dismembered the Orc Army token to grow the Shadow out of range of the Unholy Heat. But anyway, that's not the way that they do things. Like I said, basically they're just going to let this leave the battlefield. They cast an Unholy Heat. I don't know. They just don't know how this works, or not really sure what's going on here. But yeah, they're going to cast the Unholy Heat. It's only going to do 2 damage to my shadow, so I don't have to worry about it. But I do not want to be giving my opponent another turn if possible. I currently have 6 damage on board. If I dismember my own shadow, I can grow it up to 10 damage on board when things go back to me. And it's not going to risk killing the shadow because, again, they're only doing 2 damage, not 6 damage to my shadow here. So this all works out. I'm happy to dismember my own shadow, given that I'm not going to lose it. This allows me to then hopefully either just find a fetch land or some way to do damage to myself off the top, or the next 2 cards, 3 cards really, with that preordain are going to allow me to find some type of way to do damage to myself. So that's how I'm intending on getting the win and why I dismember my own shadow here. There's just no real risk. Lucky for me, they just decide to scoop it up in response to that. Unfortunately, I can't draw in this kind of replay mode that they have here, so I can't show you what my next 3 cards were, but I did do it live when I played this game, and I did have a fetch land somewhere in those top 3 cards, so I was going to get the win based off of this play here and close out the game. Again, looking back on it, I don't know, maybe my opponent misplayed a little bit, like unholy, not even a little bit, they definitely misplayed with the Unholy Heat when they still had an opportunity to do it main phase. Maybe they just aren't thinking that I'm going to have a dress down, which is kind of safe to assume, at least not in my main 60, probably somewhere in the 75, given I'm a shadow deck. But anyway, they don't get there, and they actually just concede the entire match. So no idea if they just tilted off here or if they just had something else going on that they needed to go do. Either way, I'll take it. It's a 1-0 win. We are 2-0 for the league. Welcome back for match number 3. We are on the play again. Definitely never going to complain when leagues just continue to give me that type of advantage. Opening hand is kind of average, but it's got card selection or interaction for turn 1 creature for my opponent. So long as I don't flood out, I'm feeling pretty good about where this hand can get me, so I do decide to keep it. I'm going to lead on a Polluted Delta and send it over to my opponent. They are going to play out an Otawara and a Hedron Crab. I kind of regret playing the the Polluted Delta here, given that I didn't need to be fetching technically, and it's like the one matchup that it can be problematic. Lucky for me, they're not going to have an Archive Trap, and I'm able to just Fatal Push this Hedron Crab. I do end up drawing a Consider, which is great here. Play out my fetch, crack it immediately, as I know they're not going to have a trap in hand, given that they didn't do it last time. Shocking the Watery Grave, given my life total doesn't really matter too much. Pass it back to them. They're going to cast a Hedron Crab again before making any land drops, assuming they've got land in hand, of course, given that this is mill. I'm going to consider in response, I think it's super relevant or necessary, just trying to find some type of interaction before they do anything else. But I don't have Stern Scoldings in the main board or anything like that. So I don't think I needed to be doing that there, but whatever, it is what it is. They do drop an Oboro. They're going to mill 3 cards. They find a shadow in those 3 cards, and they're going to surgically extract it. Cannot Stubborn Denial it. Unfortunately, I no longer have shadows, but luckily Murktide Regent is the best threat in this matchup. So not the end of the world. Going to be having a Murktide come down with a Stubborn Denial active for next turn. They play out a Rune Crab. I'm going to consider. I do want to just kind of get a bit deeper into my deck without overdoing it, given that they are mill. I don't want to just hand them extra cards into my graveyard if I can help it, but I do need to be still proactive, at least for the way that the current board state is. So getting a Misty Rainforest, again, fetching, trying to get opportunities to make sure I don't get got by an Archive Trap, basically. I'm going to just play out the Murktide Regent, hold up Stubborn Denial, getting rid of as many relevant cards from my graveyard as possible. I've got a 7/7 Murktide. Hopefully things go my way. They're going to start milling me for basically 12 with every fetch land that they have. So things will start to go down pretty quickly. They are just taking control, trying to surgically extract a Archmage's Charm. My only other Archmage's Charm is in my hand. I significantly consider just letting this go, but because Archmage's Charm can grab one of the crabs in a pinch, and I kind of get the sense that I'm going to potentially need to do that to win this game, given how quickly they can just throw cards into my graveyard with lands. I feel like it makes more sense to just protect it here. If they had access to black mana and 2 lands up like this, I certainly would have just let it go. But because I know that my Murktide is safe from like a Murderous Cut or a Drown the Lock, I I decided it makes sense to protect my Archmage's Charm in hand, so that I can interact potentially with a Rune Crab more meaningfully or a Hedron Crab. Uh, yeah, that's what's going on there. Flooded Strand is a draw, not super great. I'm going to preordain, finding a well, counterspell and not sure what the other one was. Going to top both. I guess I like them both. Oh, actually, I remember now. The other spell was um, my second Stubborn Denial. So obviously both good spells. In this case, I would prefer having the counter spell because I want to be able to answer anything they do. If they play another crab, that's super problematic, and Stubborn Denial can't answer that. They're not likely to have that, but nonetheless, counterspell answers anything. Stubborn Denial only answers instants and sorceries. I do keep the stub on top just in case by some miracle they don't mill it into the graveyard, but most certainly going to be the case that they do. Get in for 7 and ship it back to them with counterspell or charm up. They do hit another fetch land, so 2 cards in hand at this point, and they are just milling me out big time. Not super great. I, as we can see, do consider taking one of their crabs here. Again, really focused on kind of thinking that their crabs might be the only line to victory that they have, and their hand is just a bunch of lands or something like that. In the end, I do decide against it and just hold up counterspell instead. They're going to mill me for another 6 here after the fetch. I probably should have my graveyard out here. They did mill over one of my Murktide regions. There's still one left in the deck. I have one Orcish Bowmaster as well, and protecting this Murktide region from any type of kill spell is kind of top priority, but I'm also at 14 lands in library, or 14 cards in library. So really getting to a spot where things are starting to get tricky. Factored Sanity can just kill me. I do have a counter spell in hand, multiple counter spells in hand, but there's definitely ways where I can just die here. So I'm very lucky to just draw a Murktide region and end this game here. I'm going to be able to cast Murktide region and hold up counter spell in case they do have a kill spell. Going to be able to swing over for lethal. Murktide region, just a phenomenal card in this matchup. Very happy to have seen 2 of them without them getting disrupted whatsoever. Looking back on it, there is technically, yes, you can say obviously I got pretty lucky to draw the Murktide, but I do think had I not drawn the Murktide, given that I have an Archmage's Charm and a counterspell in hand, things do start to get a little bit interesting because as it stands, I do still have an island in my deck, so I can go fetch that island, giving me access to counterspell and charm. So realistically, I can swing in for 7 here. Let's just say, I don't know, I draw something not relevant. I swing in for 7, they're at 2. I can steal one of their crabs and still have counterspell up. So they're going to have some pretty good gas from here on forward to actually mill me out with my current hand, even if I don't draw Murktide. Again, not going to sit here and tell you that I didn't get super lucky, and maybe the game does play out differently, even if I don't draw the Murktide and things are the way they are. But nonetheless, just to kind of talk through some additional scenarios here, I still feel pretty good that my decision to protect my Archmage's Charm for situations like this, had I not drawn the Murktide region, was actually super valuable, and I'm going to say more likely than not would have ended up winning me this game in a different scenario. So keep that in mind. Good game overall. Mill's tough matchup. See how game 2 goes. Here we are for game number 2 of match 3 against Mill. Let's quickly, I guess, pull up the sideboard and we can quickly walk through that. As you'll see, there are less sideboard cards here than 15. So while it's probably not advised, most people wouldn't say to do this. I do enjoy bringing in a couple extra relevant cards against Mill and not making any cuts. I know it makes land drops more difficult, but it also increases technically, quote unquote, your life total, given that your actual life total isn't threatened. You're just increasing the amount of cards they have to mill. It can be hit and miss. I've generally had success with it. I'm obviously not bringing in my entire sideboard. I think that's way too excessive, but four-ish cards that are all going to be pretty relevant and help win a game can be a difference. And for me, that's the way I play this matchup. Not saying that that's the way you should, it's just the way that I do, and I really haven't had too much of an issue with it. Spell bombs bring both in. They protect from Drown in the Locks and can be a way to grow a Murktide, as you can just exile a bunch of instants and sorceries from your graveyard if you do have one out. Tidebinders can shut off any of their crabs. It can also destroy a land. Yeah, I mean, there's pretty much just nothing but upside there. Storm is the other card that I bring in, both of them, and they're basically just going to be obviously relevant against instant and sorceries, which most of their deck is made up of, other than their crabs. So yeah, most people wouldn't maybe advise to do what I'm doing here, but I like it. I think it's fine. If you want to try it out, then by all means, go for it. So let's take a look at the opening hand here on the draw. For me, it's a keep. Certainly sucks if they have an archive trap, but there's no way that I can throw away this hand as it represents a turn 2 shadow with very relevant disruption. It should be noted that against Mill, taking a mulligan with an average hand can be beneficial, as it actually puts one more card back into your deck that they have to mill, right? So if you're considering mulliganing against Mill and your hand is kind of subpar or pretty average, it can actually be beneficial to try and get a much better 6 or even a much better 5, because it's just adding additional cards for them to have to mill. Does it have an impact every single game? Does it make it more difficult for them every single game? No, they have tremendous amount of mill spells. They can definitely still just get there. But I don't mind thinking more strategically in that sense around how you mill or you mulligan when facing mill. Okay, one other thing to note here as we get going, my opponent is going to end up mulliganing down to 4. So unfortunately, this isn't much of a game. Obviously, I've got quite a bit of gas here, so unless they have, I don't know, something incredible, I think this one's pretty much just locked up as it is. They're going to lead on a Fatal Push. Like I said, I've got a bunch of fetch lands here. Given that they've mulliganed down to 4, I've got to assume there's got to be quite a bit of cohesiveness to the strategy that they've milled down or mulliganed down to. And they probably have an archive trap. They probably have a bunch of lands. At the end of the day, it is what it is. They've only got 2 cards in hand at this point. I'm feeling pretty good. So unless they have an archive trap, surgical extraction, the Death Shadow or something, I think I'm going to be fine here. I do want to lead on a Fatal Push under the assumption that their hand is probably like land archive trap or something like that. Thoughtseize isn't going to hit anything relevant, so it makes the most sense in my mind, and that's what I'm going to do. They are going to archive trap me after I push. They don't have the surgical extraction, so that's great, no problem. This game's again really just over at this point already. I mean, they have no idea that I have 2 Dash Shadows in hand, but from my point of view, this game is definitely over. Back to me. I'm going to go for the Thoughtseize, and the last card they have in hand is a Jace. So down to having nothing in hand, able to get out a 1/1 shadow here to start applying some pressure, and then just kind of take over the game from here. They are going to draw land, play it out. I'm going to draw a Preordain, going to fetch Shock, going to Preordain to try and find something after I play out this shadow and swing in. Preordain is going to end up finding just good stuff. Island's going to go to the bottom, Stubborn Denial on top. And yeah, this game's just straight up locked up. Here we are for match number 4. Going to be on the play again. Very fortunate to be on the play 4 matches in a row now. Sometimes we get pretty lucky. Opponent is on a companion, which is a Jingitha. They're on 7 in hand. Gonna have to assume at this point that they're probably on Domain, given the way the meta is currently shaking up. Maybe they're on Tron, but I've got to think that it's Domain. So this hand is definitely a keep up against Domain. It's definitely not that great against Tron, so we'll hope that that's the way that this plays out. Go to play a fetch, crack it, play a Preordain. Gonna find a Shadow and a Dismember, and I want both of those things under the assumption that Scion of Draco is likely something I'm gonna have to be up against. They do have Leyline of the Guild Pack Scion combo potentially available to them, but they haven't had a Guild Pack in their opening hand that would be on the battlefield right now. So safe to say that I will be able to dismember any Scions that they play, should this be the matchup that I think it is. I'm going to keep both drawing the Death Shadow first, as much as, if we can play aggressively. If they play a Ragavan, dismember the Ragavan, get out a Death Shadow. That Death Shadow will still be susceptible to a Lightning Bolt or potentially a Leyline Binding. So it doesn't really make sense to play super aggressively. So the plan, if this is the matchup, is going to be more so to lean on Orcish Bowmaster early and then find a way to protect my Death Shadow from there. So yeah, I'm going to ship it back to my opponent. They play a Sacred Foundry here, untapped, and put in a Ragavan, almost definitely signaling that this is a domain matchup. Back to me, I'm going to draw the known Dismember and fetch and shock to ping down this Ragavan and ship it back to my opponent. They play a fetch land, pass it back to me. I'm going to draw Drown the Lock. Not too bad, but it certainly won't help against any Leyline Bindings, at least not anytime soon. Not going to be able to take down a Scion, but we've already got a Dismember there. So an okay counterspell, but certainly not the best thing to hit. Going to get in for 2, not too worried about a dashed Ragavan. Send it back to my opponent. They're going to crack. In their turn, they go fetch land into Kavu. I'm going to push it in their end step. They try and stub it, which I'm going to drown, given just its extremely mana efficient. At the same time, as I was talking about earlier, Drown the Lock in this matchup can be average to below average, given the converted mana cost of some of their spells. So I'd rather use it here than anywhere else. Coming back to me, I'm going to draw Thoughtseize for turn. Definitely going to play it to get a sense of what's going on in their hand and figure out how I can get this Death Shadow out without having it be susceptible to removal that I can't play around or can't protect my shadow from. Thoughtseize is going to reveal Leyline Binding, Lightning Bolt, Ragavan, Scion of Draco. In this case, let's see. Yeah, I mean, they've got basically pretty good hand that lines up against what I have in terms of it being in my favor. So I'm definitely going to be taking the Leyline Binding here, leaving them with the Bolt, Scion, and Ragavan, anticipating that I'll be able to dismember the Scion and push the Ragavan in their turn. Whatever they draw, I'm obviously susceptible to, so long as I don't get Thoughtseize bugged, I should be okay. And as long as I don't drop myself below 3 life moving forward, or maybe trying to avoid the double bolt territory and keep myself somewhere around 7, that would be super ideal. So that's the plan. We'll see how that continues to play out for me. I'm going to get in for 2 again. Don't have to worry about that dashed Ragavan just because of Fatal Push and Dismember available to me. Ship it back to my opponent. And they are going to basically play it out exactly as anticipated, playing out the Scion and the Ragavan. And I'm going to dismember the Scion now while I've got an opportunity. Again, just kind of playing more so smart, even though I don't have to. It's impossible for them to have both an untapped blue land and Stubborn Denial with only 2 cards in hand, one of them being a Lightning Bolt that I know of. But nonetheless, it's still good to get into good habits and play as smart as possible. If they did have some way of having an untapped blue land and potentially a Stubborn Denial, at least it's somewhat smarter to try and take this play now while they're not playing a land. Anyway, not something that's happening, but nonetheless, still something to be aware of. I'm going to pay the full 4 life for this Dismember and push this Ragavan. Send it back to me. Maybe send it back to me. There we go. Drawing a Watery Grave, so I'm going to get in for 2 here and play out my Death Shadow. I don't actually want to play out the Watery Grave because it does put me dead to double bolt. I know there's already 1 in their hand. It's possible that they've either already drawn that second bolt or they draw it in their next turn here. So I want to hold the Watery Grave to make sure that if there's an opportunity to swing for lethal next turn, I can shock in the Watery Grave and potentially protect myself from either that double bolt scenario if I draw a counter spell, or just close out the game if I know the opportunity's there. So gonna hold on to this watery grave and not put myself in a position to just accidentally lose this game. But I have pretty much all of the pressure and just value in my favor. They're going to play a territorial Kavu, which in the day that's not going to be too much of a problem. I'm going to be able to swing in with my Death Shadow, force a block, depending on what I draw, maybe close this game out. Very fortunate to have drawn Dress Down, which just so happens to kill the territorial Kavu while also growing my Death Shadow to a 13/13 without having to lower my life total any further and continue to protect me from double bolt territory should they have something to deal with this Dress Down. I guess Stubborn Denial would really be the only thing, and they do have 1 blue mana up. So in this case, I am going to lead on Dress Down to make sure I can make the right play with this Watery Grave if the Dress Down doesn't resolve. If it does resolve, then of course this game is just over. I cast the Dress Down, it does resolve, and we go on to game number 2. Here we are for game number 2. Sideboarding first and foremost. Let me just pull that up for you guys. Going to be dropping 1 Drown in the Lock, 1 Archmage's Charm, 1 Preordain, bringing in a Dress Down and 2 Hibernations. The Drown in the Lock, basically feel like that's one that we can be trimming on, just given that they have Leyline Bindings and Scion of Dracos, cards that typically are going to be too far out of reach for Drown in the Lock to be able to hit. They are the biggest threats in the deck. So trimming on 1, perfectly comfortable with that. Archmage's Charm, 3 mana spell, all blue. Mostly just concerned about the fact that I'm bringing in 2 3-mana spells. Don't want to get overloaded with those, so dropping 1 of them, perfectly comfortable with. And then dropping a Preordain as 7 card selection spells is definitely plentiful, and I prefer to increase my instant speed play than have a sorcery speed spell that reduces my play in my opponent's turn. So that's the reasoning for that. And then bringing in a Dress Down that's just very strong, as we saw. And being able to kill Kavus, grow shadows, turn off Scion's abilities, and then all of the creatures that then get abilities from the Scion. So super good to have there. And then Hibernation is hands down the best sideboard card to have in the matchup. I think it's becoming very popular simply because of the fact that the domain is starting to uptick in popularity. There was also just a ban announced in between me kind of recording some of the different videos for this match. So with Violent Outburst leaving the format, I'm anticipating that there's likely to be even more domain decks picking up speed. So having at least 2 Hibernations, maybe even 3 in the sideboard could be a very strong thing to be doing moving forward, at least until Modern Horizons 3 comes out. So yeah, bringing those 2 in, it's just phenomenal at basically bouncing their entire board if they got the guild pack out there. And it's essentially just Hercule's Recall on steroids, given that opponent doesn't have a bunch of 0 and 1 mana spells to be able to rebuild their board. Basically on the next turn, they really have to kind of take some time to build it out. They typically have to fetch lands and do damage to themselves to be able to actually get their colors again. So yeah, just a phenomenal card to have for the matchup. Opponent is keeping 7. My opening hand, I'm very happy with Thoughtseize to be able to probably remove like a Scion of Draco or anything that's going to be problematic. Hibernation, like I talked about, phenomenal. Don't have anywhere close to 3 lands right now, but hopefully they consider the Preordain are going to help me get there. This member can deal with the turn 1 Ragavan or anything that could be problematic to the future, depending on how they play things out. So very happy with how this plays on the draw. Going to keep it and see how it goes. Opponent is going to have a Leyline of the Guild pack, so they do have basically just rainbow everything at this point. They're going to play a fetch land, ship it back to me. I drop Preordain, going to lead on a Watery Grave, Thoughtseize, assuming that I'm going to be able to find probably a Scion of Draco in their hand, which is exactly what's there. They also have a Leyline Binding and a Lightning Bolt. Not too concerned about the Leyline Binding. I'm sure I'll be able to dig into something that protects me from it or gets it out of their hand. And they don't really have any other real threat to my life total. So they're going to have to start ripping some pretty good cards off the top of their deck. Yeah, taking a Scion of Draco and playing it from there. Back over to them. They are going to fetch before they get to their turn. It's not really necessary, so I guess they're basically just thinning their deck, trying to hit better spells and not flood. They are happening to do damage to do that. So they've got rainbow lands already in play with those fetch lands and the guild pack. Not sure I fully agree with it, but I guess to each their own. So shipping it back to them, they are going to play out one of the known fetches and pass it back to me. I'm going to draw a stub, cast a Preordain, hopefully be able to find a second land. I do find a shadow and a consider. Don't find the land, do draw the shadow that I was kind of happy to see but couldn't keep. So not the end of the world, but certainly would have loved to see a second land. Again, my opponent is going to fetch in my end step, just doing damage to themselves to thin. So I'll take it. Back over to them. They're going to play up the last known land that I had seen from my Thoughtseize, and they are going to cast a Nishiba Brawler here and pass it back to me. I'm going to draw a counterspell. Definitely not looking good at this point. I do have the option to either dismember their Brawler and not have a land, or try to dig a little bit deeper and then hopefully be able to dismember if I do hit the second land. Hitting the land definitely seems to be much too important than trying to get this Brawler off the board. So I am going to prioritize Preordain, trying to dig and kind of cast two spells here at once, or in one turn, I should say. Dress Down and Hibernation is what I find at the top of my deck. Both very good, but unfortunately, without the second land, I do have to ship them both to the bottom, and I find a Thoughtseize. So not great having to discard one card to hand size here in my cleanup. It's going to be a counter spell. At this point, it's just not that great. I really need to be able to interact with their board. I do know they, of course, have a Leyline Binding in hand, but I now have a Stubborn Denial to be able to help kind of protect my Death Shadow that I eventually hope to be able to play out, and just hope they don't have anything else to remove it off the board. So Counterspell is going to hit the bin. I'm going to send it back to them. They're going to play out another land, so they are kind of flooding a little bit here. They're going to swing in for 5, put Jinkitha to hand, and leave them with one unknown card, the Jinkitha, and the Lightning Bolt in hand. Not too bad of a spot, but definitely need to find a land. Draw is going to be a Watery Grave. Fantastic. Going to shock that in. Going to play out my Shadow and basically hold up Stubborn Denial for the binding. I had a lot of different options, but they've got a Bolt in hand, and I've gotten to the point where Thoughtseize is probably a liability when I intend on having to use Dismember, paying the 4 life in a later turn. So my opponent likely going to bolt my face. The Shadow, as long as it's not going to be eaten by a second Leyline Binding, is going to be able to kind of help hold them from any super aggressive attacks if they really want to go all in. So yeah, that's the play there, kind of assuming that I'm not really going to get to use this Thoughtseize again. Again, they are fetching to what I assume has to be thin their deck, because otherwise they're just taking unnecessary damage. They are going to play up this Leyline Binding. I'm going to Stubborn Denial. They don't have a counterspell or a second Leyline Binding to play afterwards. They're going to play out a Wild Nacatl, and they choose not to swing. Not sure I fully agree with that. I'm not going to block here, because at the end of the day, if I do block, I'm basically giving up my Death Shadow unless they assign damage poorly. But basically, if you don't know the way that trample damage works, you do have the option to assign all of the damage to the Death Shadow as the opposing player, right? So if they want to swing in, I block, they can put 5 damage on the Death Shadow and it's going to die. I, of course, don't take any damage, but I'm losing my Death Shadow. Not something I'm super interested in doing in this current board state. Of course, if I don't block, I'm essentially at 1, given that fact that they have the Lightning Bolt, but I kind of have to accept that and just hope that I'm able to get myself out of that with an Orcish Bowmaster in hand to kind of be able to start building a little bit more of a board state, and maybe I find the one of 2 islands that I have in my deck to be able to cast a Hibernation. Obviously not a great spot, but there's just very little chance that I'm willing to make a block here, given that I feel like I have to play a little bit more aggressively to win this game. Anyway, back to me, and I'm going to draw a Fatal Push for turn. This is actually a really good draw given the current board state, and it gives me a pretty interesting line that I think is going to work out in my favor, depending on what their hand is, or what their one unknown card in hand is, I should say. Basically, from here, my current game plan is to Thoughtseize, knowing that they're almost certainly going to bolt my face, which is then, after the Thoughtseize resolves, going to have me at 4 life. With the Thoughtseize, I'm anticipating, of course, either being able to take the known Jinkitha that they have in hand, or hopefully something more valuable like a Stubborn Denial, just to be able to make sure that my Fatal Push is essentially going to be able to resolve, and I can enact the game plan that I have in mind for the current board state, right? So basically, the way that I see this is I'm going to be at 4 life after Thoughtseize. I want to be able to clear the way for my Fatal Push to resolve, because I'm going to be swinging in for 9 to be able to lower my opponent's life total to a point where I can win the next turn. I intend on them not blocking, which they're almost certainly not going to, given the current board state. And I intend on pushing the Nishiba Brawler before I go over to their turn. This would leave them with basically a Wild Nacatl as a 3/3 that is not going to be killing me. It would be putting me to 1 if they swing in on their next turn. So I'm essentially hoping to fade basically a dashed Ragavan, uh, anything that can, of course, remove my Death Shadow, which is probably almost only going to be Leyline Binding at this point in the game. They can always play a blocker the next turn, but I've got an Orcish Bowmaster, I've got Dismember. There are ways for me to essentially be able to get out of this and win by being aggressive and taking this line. So that's the way that I'm intending to play this, and hopefully things go the way that I intend. Thoughtseize is going to, first and foremost, get responded to by a Lightning Bolt, exactly what I expected, down to 6, growing my Shadow to a 7/7. Thoughtseize resolves. I see that they have a Leyline of the Guild pack and Jangitha, which I knew of. Leyline of the Guild pack is essentially a completely useless card at this point. So Jangitha goes, and I just have to essentially hope that they completely miss on their top deck. Realistically, especially when you think about how they likely sideboarded, given the matchup, at least I've got to assume they probably trimmed on a Ragavan, maybe 2. Yes, it's a good card. Yes, it's a decent card in the matchup, but I play 4 Orcish Bowmasters. I play a lot of removal. It can definitely be a card that ends up just being a liability. So I'm kind of assuming they've dropped at least one of them. So they probably have 4 Lightning Bolts in their deck. I've just had one of them leave. So we're looking at like 6 cards in the top 46, well, in their deck of 46 that they can hit that are likely to end the game next turn. There's, of course, other cards that can make it more problematic for me, but I need to be aggressive to be able to win. There's no way I'm winning this game without lowering their life total. So that's the game plan, and we'll see how it continues to play out. Of course, I swing in, no blocks from them. They think they're going to be able to obviously clear things up here. I'm going to push the Brawler as expected and ship it back to them with just a Leyline of the Guild pack in hand. They are going to, cycle a Triumph and play out a fetch land. So definitely been benefiting from them flooding, but they also have taken, 3 damage. So they should be at 9 life right now. Still very much dead to my Shadow, so I guess it's not going to matter in the end. But it could have, and that's kind of the reason why I don't think they should have been fetching earlier. They hold back the Nacatl, knowing that they only have a Guild pack in hand. I've got a Dismember. I draw a Watery Grave, so this game is 100% over at this point. I can choose to either Dismember the Wild Nacatl for 2 life and 2. I can shock in the Watery Grave, pay the full amount. I can shock in a Watery Grave, cast a Hibernation for, I don't know, style points if you want to call it that, which is the line I decided to take. So going to Watery Grave, Hibernation, bounce everything back, and this game is over. Here we are for match number 5, going for the trophy. Not getting to play this turn, so gonna have to play well. Been lucky enough to get to play every game up until now, or every match up until now. So on the play, this hand is average. I don't know. It's potentially able to be thrown back, but with Dismember, Death Shadow, enough ability to lower my life total if I'm up against a creature deck to get the Death Shadow out and hopefully be able to protect it with an Archmage's Charm in the future. I'm okay with keeping this and hopefully being able to sculpt with the Preordain in time to have a relevant hand against whatever matchup I have against me. Opponent does have a companion. It is a Jangitha again, so have to assume I'm playing the exact same matchup, playing Domain Zoo. Again, could be Tron, but I'm going to lean into the fact that this is probably Domain given the current meta share. And with that in mind, Dismember, handle a turn 1 Ragavan, Preordain, like I said, help me dig to some other relevant stuff, Archmage's Charm to deal with whatever they might throw at me in turn 4, I guess, onward. So certainly not super great to be seeing Archmage's Charm, and I know that's why a lot of people have been calling it clunky whenever I bring it up in any discussions, but I still think it's an okay card to have in the deck. We'll continue to see how that plays out from here. So opponent is more or less going to lead on the exact same opener that my last opponent did in their first game against me, Sacred Foundry into a Ragavan, and that Ragavan is almost certainly going to be losing a couple limbs to this Dismember. Drawing a counterspell for turn, definitely like to see that. going to dismember the Ragavan and ship it back to my opponent, paying 4 life for that dismember, putting myself at 14 life. They are going to shock in an Overgrown Tomb and cast a Brawler that is a 4/3. That's fine. Not super ideal, given they don't have maybe current ways to deal with it, but my plan is to be able to grow that Death Shadow to a point where I don't have to worry about it, and if they want to attack in and help that happen, not the end of the world. I'm going to draw and play the Polluted Delta. I'm going to basically just hold up Counterspell for turn, ship it over to them, hoping to be able to counter Scion. They're going to play, a fetch, and then crack the fetch in their second main phase and go for a Scion. Going to attempt to counter it once they do that, but they do end up having a Stubborn Denial, which is why they fetch for this breeding pool, essentially. So Scion's going to hit the battlefield. Luckily, they're just continuing to give trample to a green creature, so not like it's granting it anything extra from its effect. Shipping it back over to me, I draw another fetch land, starting to flood out a little bit. Not super great. Going to cast a Preordain before making a land drop. If I find a push, then I can play out my Darkslick Shores, push the Brawler, and have a 4/4 Shadow in the face of their Scion. Instead, I am going to find a second Shadow and a Counterspell. I'm going to top both and draw the Shadow, and then play out the Darkslick Shores, as I don't want to lose more life with the current board state, as a Scion by itself is only a 3-turn clock if they want to chip in with some flying damage, right? So I've been pretty happy with making the switch to Darkslick Shores, and it's places like this where this type of line and having access to it is feasible, and why I like having it as a 1-of in the deck. Not losing life, not making myself more susceptible to increasing the clock for my opponent, while still getting to do good plays like putting 2 Death Shadows on board, is, yeah, all just wonderful stuff for me. So love Darkslick Shores, would highly encourage anyone who hasn't tried it out yet to do so. It is very versatile and just great at enabling playing the deck as efficiently as possible, and choosing when possible to be able to lower your life or not lower your life in the face of a lot of aggression from your opponent. They are going to put a Jangitha in hand and pass it back to me. I now have 4/4 Shadows. They are not swinging in because they don't want to be dying to them. Drawing a counterspell for turn, definitely okay with that. Gonna play out a fetch and force some blocks. They decide to actually block with the Draco here, which I guess is smart because it does allow them to have access to 5 damage from the Brawler and be able to dash in like a Ragavan, or if they hit a Lightning Bolt, they could kill me. If I do decide to fetch, which in this case I do, because I do want to be able to put my opponent basically down to a spot where if they don't hit anything good, I'm able to just swing in and kill them with my Death Shadow. So I'm fetching, I'm shocking to play aggressively. Got a counterspell. I've got an Archmage's Charm for the following turn if whatever I need to draw 2 cards to dig deeper, or to steal a Ragavan, or whatever it needs to be. I've got options, and I feel like, again, I'm in a spot where I need to be able to play aggressively to be able to win this game and close it out without letting my opponent continue to try and just draw things that are going to be problematic for me. So fetching, shocking, giving 7 damage to my opponent while clearing the Draco off the board and leaving them with just a Brawler. I'm not dead. I'm at 1 life. Of course, they can hit stuff that is going to kill me, but it needs to be a combination of good cards, and I feel like it's in my favor that I take this line, play aggressively, and see how it goes. They're going to swing in with the Brawler, essentially putting me down to 1, and they are going to scoop it up. So again, taking the aggressive line, taking the play to win line instead of the play to not lose line, ends up, in my opinion, being the reason that I win this game. Yes, they could have had some sequence of Ragavan Lightning Bolts, Stubborn Denial, or Double Bolts, Stubborn Denial, or I don't know. There's options, of course, that they could have, but it would have to be a combination of 3 perfect cards to close out this game and not lose. So I'm pretty happy with the choice, and obviously very happy with the fact that able to win the game. So at this point, undefeated through the entire league at this point. Haven't lost a game, going into hopefully a win here and getting the trophy. And here we are for game number 2, trophy on the line. Haven't lost a game yet this entire league, so feeling pretty good. Quick look at sideboards. It should be very much identical to the last match, where it should be Archmage's Charm as a one of coming out, Drown the Lock coming out as a one of, and Preordain coming out as a one of. But I do decide to take a counterspell instead of a Drown the Lock. In my opinion, this is wrong. I'd much rather have the ability to interact with anything on the stack than have something that is susceptible to graveyard hate, or just the fact that their Scion of Dracos and Leyline Bindings are typically going to have a converted mana cost well above what a Drown the Lock is going to be relevant to hit in a match like this. So I would suggest going with the first match's sideboarding plan than what I've done here. No idea why I made this decision in this case, and certainly moving forward would try and make sure that I don't do this again, but I don't think it's going to have too much of an impact on me, but still something to be aware of in terms of a difference here. Opening hand on the draw, pretty much a snap keep. Thoughtseize to be able to start peeling away their hand. Fatal Push to answer any turn 1 Ragavans they might try and play. Preordain to sculpt and really kind of just dig deeper into the deck, and then Dress Down to either enable Death Shadows should I draw one, or remove a Territorial Kavu if they have any in hand, or try and play any out over turn. So yeah, very happy with this. Going to let them lead on a tapped Triome. To me, the signals they probably have a Scion of Draco in hand. So I'm going to absolutely be leading on a Thoughtseize here and trying to see how to play the rest of the match from here based off of their hand. Looking at their hand, we're going to see that they have no Scion of Draco, which was a little bit surprising to me, but they do have a Brawler, a Kavu, Stub, and Bolt, as well as a Meddling Mage. No idea what they would intend on naming with the Meddling Mage. They've got a lot of different options, and I certainly don't want to really give them the opportunity to name something that could significantly impact my hand. So I am going to take the Meddling Mage here, leading them with a Brawler, Kavu, Stub, and Bolt, with the plan being that I can essentially remove the Territorial Kavu with a Dress Down, and I can push the Brawler, just continue to keep them clear of any real board presence. I guess I'll pop this up so you guys can see exactly what they have. So yeah, passing it back to them. They are going to fetch and shock. They're going to end up playing out a Kavu here and basically pass it back to me. Now, for me, this would open up basically a really nice tempo play to just Dress Down, removing the Kavu, drawing a card, getting a little deeper into the deck. But they do have a Stubborn Denial in hand that I know about. They do have a Brawler, so if they hit another land, they're able to have Brawler with Stub backup. Now, of course, I can just Thoughtseize the Stub away, or force them to counter the Thoughtseize with the Stub, and then I'm able to just push the Brawler anyway. So I think the better play is to actually, Dress Down, draw the card, get a little bit of tempo advantage, and then be able to essentially deal with their Stub and Brawler through Thoughtseize and Fatal Push. At the end of the day, that's not the line that I take. I Thoughtseize away the Brawler. I'm going to Fatal Push the Kavu and leave Stubborn Denial in hand, while keeping, of course, a Dress Down for myself for future turns. I mean, I don't think it's significantly worse, but I do think just based off of where I am and the fact that I don't have a threat right now, getting deeper into the deck is definitely important. So that extra card draw, and not just trapping a Dress Down in hand when it's such a valuable card or good card against a Kavu, is just a better play. Anyway, is what it is. I draw Dismember for turns, so that's going to be great for any Dracos that they try and play. They said this is going to kind of result in me playing a Thoughtseize. I do find out that they have a second Bolt in hand now, so 6 life off of my total life total right now, more or less at 8. So very cautious to not put myself in a situation where I die to double Bolt. I am going to have to fetch and shock here to push the Kavu and basically leave them with the hand that they have. I'm now effectively at 5 life, so definitely need to be very cautious about how I play with my life total moving forward. They're going to miss on a land drop here, playing out a Scion of Draco, which I'm definitely happy to have that Dismember from last turn off the top of my deck. I am going to draw Drown the Lock, and really not the best card in that matchup. Ideally, I'd like to be able to, of course, just drown the Scion of Draco and move on, but that's not what's going to be able to happen given that it has 12 CMC. Of course, there is the option here to just full pay a Dismember and pass back to them, but I want to try and start digging a little bit deeper, sculpting my hand, enabling myself to apply some pressure, given that I am effectively at 5 life here. So I am going to lead on a Preordain to try and find a threat, or at least start sculpting my hand in a way that's going to be super valuable to me, and then pay 2 life and 2 to Dismember this Scion of Draco, which essentially will put me to 3 life with the 2 bolts that they have in hand if they want to point them at my face. So definitely opening myself up to losing to a 3rd bolt, but I do feel like I kind of need to be a little bit aggressive and super mana efficient while allowing to dig a little bit deeper into the deck to close this game out. I'm going to find an Orcish Bowmaster and a Consider on the top of my deck. I end up keeping both of these. There is an argument to just bottoming and trying to find a bigger threat, but Consider is going to continue to allow me to get deeper into my deck over time and kind of do some sculpting, have some card selection. Orcish Bowmaster is a threat. It's definitely not a great threat, but it is going to allow me to start chipping away at their life total. So I'd rather have it than not. Putting them both on top, it doesn't really matter which way I draw them. And then I'm going to dismember this for 2 life and 2. So essentially at 3 life, but obviously at 9 right now, depending on how they want to play these bolts. They are going to miss on land again. So they have 1 unknown card in hand. Passing it back to me, I am going to draw the Consider for turn. In this case, I am trying to consider here to find a Murktide. They don't have a way, or at least presumably they don't have a way to interact with the Murktide, given that 3 of the 4 cards in their hand are not going to be able to take it down. I do end up finding a counterspell instead, so I'm actually going to keep this to be able to answer any future Scion of Dracos that they maybe try and play. So I'd rather keep the counterspell and be able to keep things off the battlefield than dig deeper for a threat. In this case, I do get to hold up Orcish Bowmaster if they don't end up doing anything. They end up finding a 3rd land, and I am going to cast this Orcish Bowmaster and start to slowly, very slowly chip away at their life total and kind of pass it back to myself here. Drawing Stubborn Denial for turn. Not super great. It's not ferocious, so it's not a hard counter. For sure, it has the ability to maybe answer a Lightning Bolt if my opponent goes for like a really big turn where they tap out, but not the best draw. I'm going to start chipping away here. I do have the ability to answer a Dashed Ragavan with Drown the Lock plus Stubborn Denial if they want to try and Stubborn Denial to Drown the Lock. So I'm happy to just start chipping in as much damage as possible without real fear for the Dashed Ragavan. They're going to fetch and bring in a tapped Triome just to, I guess, kind of thin their deck and have more access to a lot of good mana. They're going to try and binding my, what I presume is going to be my Bowmaster. That's fine by me. They don't have a lot of card draw in the deck. I don't think maybe any other than cycling the Triomes. So Bowmaster's really done its job here. I still have a creature on board and continue to build out my ability to just chip away at their life total bit by bit. But at this point, 13 turn clock is not significant. Draw Darkslick Shorts for turn. That's going to come in tapped. Really not the end of the world here, as I still am able to hold up Counterspell and Stubborn Denial, or Drown the Lock, Stubborn Denial. Yeah, perfectly fine by me. Still chipping in for 1, not worried about a Dashed Ragavan. Need to continue to try and be as aggressive as a 1/1 token can be. They are going to cast a Rest in Peace in this case. I do absolutely have to answer this with a Drown the Lock, otherwise my Drown the Lock is essentially just a dead card for the rest of the game, and any future Drown the Locks that I draw are also dead cards. So definitely need to get this out of here. It's another reason why cutting or trimming on a Drown the Lock in the matchup is always just a good option. The fact that they have access to Rest in Peace, and they're definitely going to look to bring it in, given that we play Murktides. Yeah, Drown the Lock is just a mediocre card in the matchup. So going to answer that with a Drown the Lock. If they try to fight over it, then I do have Stubborn Denial. I don't think I care so much at that point, but at the same time, basically my Murktides become uncastable if it resolves. So maybe I would fight over it on the stack if they did decide to do that, but they're not going to. And they're going to just pass it back to me. I am going to draw a Consider. I'm going to cast that Consider again, trying to find a threat. Going to find another Consider. Happy to keep it. It will allow me to do something in their turn. I'm not going to try and get overly aggressive and cast Consider again, because I do want to have both Counterspell and Stubborn Denial available to me, or Dress Down and Stubborn Denial available to me. So I don't want to overcommit to spending mana in my turn if I can help it. I'm going to pass back to them while I continue to chip away at their life total bit by bit. They do find their 4th land. Their hand is still very much Bolt, Stubborn Denial, unknown card, and now they are going to be adding a Jangitha to that. I'm going to consider in their end step and find a Fatal Push, which I will actually bin in this case. I mean, they've got a Jangitha in hand, so I've kind of got to assume that that's their biggest threat that they're going to have, at least for the next couple of turns. Obviously, Fatal Push is good against the Kavu, good against a Brawler. I mean, they've got a lot of cards, creatures, that this is going to be a good card to have, but I just need to be digging for a threat. I need to close this game up faster. Drown the Lock is what I find instead. At this point, Drown the Lock is actually starting to get pretty good. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 cards in graveyard, so it can answer a Leyline Binding at this point. And also that Jangitha that they have in hand. So definitely not a bad draw at this point. Going to hit a fetch land. Again, being very well aware of the fact that I'm essentially down to 5 life, so do not want to be cracking that unless I absolutely have to. Going to play it out, swing in, pass back to them. They're going to basically just pass back to me here. So 2 unknown cards in hand. Still feeling okay about where this is at. Going to draw Hibernation for turn. They don't have a guild pack out, so Hibernation is certainly not as strong of a card as it can be in the matchup, but definitely not going to complain about having it. It can bounce their Jengith as a nice tempo play, or if they try and build out a bigger board state with multiple green creatures, definitely able to tempo something up. Going to throw out a Ragavan here, non-dashed Ragavan, which I'm going to just drown on the stack. And then they're going to pass it back to me. Yeah, not fetching here. Again, don't want to be lowering my life total. Draw another fetch land. Still have no intentions of fetching to thin the deck. I do not want to get overly aggressive with my life total and accidentally lose something as silly as just having lost 1 life to trying to thin my deck. Continue to punch in for 1 damage as much as I can. They're going to just pass it back to me. They've got a full grip now, so 4 cards are known, 3 are not. I'm going to draw Brazen Borrower. Definitely happy to see this. At this point, it is a decent threat, which they'll have to probably bolt if they don't want to die to it. So that does help kind of reduce some pressure from my life total while also being able to apply some pressure for myself. So very happy with Brazen Borrower in the list and very happy to see it here. Passing back to them. They are going to play out a Territorial Kavu, pass back to me. I've got a couple different options that I can take here, but I think the best and most efficient way to do this is to just bounce the Kavu in their end step, which is what I'm doing here, and then fetching down to 8 life and casting the Brazen Borrower to really start applying pressure. Yeah, very happy with this. Not too concerned if they have the bolts. The Brazen Borrower, I'd much rather it go at the borrower at this point than at my face, given that I'm at 8 life and I know they have another bolt in hand at least. Drawing a Bowmaster for turn. So at this point, I can definitely cast the Orcish Bowmaster to apply as much pressure as possible and kind of force them to bolt something on my battlefield, likely the Brazen Borrower, to kind of make sure they don't end up in a spot where they just die. But I don't want to give them any incentive to bolt a creature. They've been showing me that they have no interest in really using these bolts on my creatures. They're not too concerned about their life total, even though they're now at 7 with 4 toughness on the battlefield. I'd much rather try and chip in 4/4, and then potentially they end up putting themselves in a situation where they go down to 1 life, and I'm able to just flash in a Bowmaster for the win, instead of being super aggressive and forcing them to kill one of my creatures. So going to chip in for 4. They continue to just take damage, which I will happily take. At this point, I've got the ability to cast a Bowmaster, a counter spell, and hold up a Stubborn Denial, all without losing any more life. They are finally going to throw a bolt at my face, which I'm going to counter here, as I don't want to get into a spot where they continue to just throw bolts at me. They are going to fetch here, which in this case I am going to respond with the Orcish Bowmaster to put them down to essentially 1 life, and force them to have a pretty insane set of cards in hand to be able to close this game out for themselves. And this also essentially reduces their ability to put any more lands onto the battlefield unless they hit a basic plains or island. I don't know exactly how many basic lands they play, but it's unlikely that they will have access to 5 mana to get this Jangitha out. Not that it would save them anyway. Yeah, ship it back to them, and they scoop it up. So this game is over, and it's been a flawless 5-0 match victory, 9-0 for the entire league. And, of course, had one opponent who just scooped it up and conceded after 1 game. So maybe not as flawless as some others can find out there, but very happy with how this entire league went, taking on 2 domain lists, which I think some people have been not so much maybe struggling with, but trying to figure out the best ways to approach the matchup. So hopefully back-to-back matches that had seen success like this can be helpful for any of you guys that are struggling with the matchup and getting a sense of how I play it, especially if your 75 matches a very similar 75 to what I have. Overall, I think very good league, a lot to look back on and be happy with, and some decisions that could go a couple of different directions. And that's part of the reason why I love the deck so much. It does enable me to just have a wide decision tree that can have an impact on both winning and losing. And the better you are at making good decisions that compound over time, the better you are with the deck. That's obviously the case with a variety of different modern decks these days. but there's a reason why Dimir Shadow is my favorite deck and why I commit myself to it. It just has a lot of variability, a lot of fun decision choices, and it really rewards good play. So here we are, 5-0, first one of the, I guess, new league cycle. So very happy with that, hoping to get more videos out in a much more frequent manner, but very much appreciate the support that you guys have given me thus far. So if this is your first time checking out the videos, hopefully you stuck around for the whole thing and you were able to gain some value out of this. And if you haven't touched Dimir Shadow before, I would highly recommend that you do give it a try, even with some of the new shakeups in the format. I think Dimir Shadow is continually going to be probably okay positioned unless Yawgmoth just completely takes over the format to the point where it's just omnipresent and oppressive. But so long as that's not the case, and there's some other, kind of more combo-y type of matchups that aren't heavily creature based, I think we're going to be in a pretty good spot moving forward as Dimir Shadow pilots. We'll see what Modern Horizons has to offer and how much that completely shakes up the format. Hopefully, it brings Dimir Shadow pilots something interesting, or at least one good card to kind of help grow the deck in a meaningful way. Would love to see a little bit of additional threat power, cheap threat power, or some significant card advantage. I don't know what it's going to potentially be. Maybe it's nothing. It's still a good ways out, but we'll continue to look at that as time goes on. Again, thank you guys so much for taking the time to check this out, and looking forward to bringing you guys more Dimir Shadow content.